Thank you very much, Richard. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your day to be here this morning to listen to insurance people speak. I know when you wake up in the morning, that's not the first thing that crosses your mind. Let's go and listen to insurance. It's normally the file that most people put aside. And I think just as an opening comment, I'd like to say that what we're trying to do and discuss with you today is not really about trying to move insurance product. Of course, if that happens along the way, we're glad because we get paid that way. But the point really about what Aon does is more around getting you to understand risk, and our ultimate intention is that you don't spend more money on insurance products, believe it or not. Closer to me. Is that better? We actually don't want you to spend more money on insurance products. We want you to understand the risk that you've got within your business, and we want to help you have conversations around how to mitigate that risk and get rid of it if you can. Part of that solution is obviously through insurance. So to the, I need to move this slightly if you don't mind so I can see the slide down the bottom. Okay. I'm going to talk to you really briefly around the Aon Risk Management Survey as an introduction to my colleagues. Aon conducts globally this survey around a number of participants. In this particular survey, we had close on 1,418 respondents to be precise from around the world. We collate the responses from this risk management survey and come up with a series of results, some of which are interesting, some of which are quite confusing, frankly, because it cuts across what we think is the norm. We conduct it in many languages around the world, and it's the 5th of its kind since 2007. The topics we cover are up on the board, but really the risk management survey is about trying to get you, the respondents, to talk about what's important to you within your business. All right, we cover multinationals. Some companies are multinationals. Other entities that respond will have single country. Some respondents even have single location risk. The fact is that not all of those are the same, and so it's the combined result of everything that comes out of the survey that makes it interesting for more than one party. Okay, you'll see a final point there on captives, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on, but captives are really something that's very interesting to Aon when we look to the way that we manage risk effectively within our businesses. So on the respondent profile, it's, as we said, it's international, it's global. Of the responding countries, you'll find that 21% come from emerging economies. We're talking about Asia, Africa, South America. The rest of that comes out of the US and Europe predominantly. Now, for those of you who would look at this and say, well, hang on, why is that relevant to us? Well, it's relevant to you if you are either a multinational or a global company, or you aspire to be one of those companies, or at least have aspirations to put the standards of the way you manage your risk or your attitude towards business and the risk that it contains to multinational, international, global type of standards. If there's anyone out there, and I doubt it in this kind of forum, that doesn't want to be there, please bear with me. The other guys may be more interesting and relevant, but I think you'll find that some of this is definitely relevant. And the report itself comes out to about, this thick. If you're struggling to sleep at night, I find it's a really good report to read in detail. You'll sleep right through. There is an executive summary with a lot of pictures, and that's the part that most people skip straight to, and that's really the highlight. So the top 10 risks that we've got are up on the top on the screen there. And what's interesting for me and for Aon as an entity is that we have property and business interruption appearing in the top 10 risks worldwide. That's something that we wouldn't really expect to be seeing every single time we run this risk. Why? Because people understand, as risk management has evolved, how to deal with property damage, how to deal with business interruption risk. They're insurable. And so we don't expect to see them up in the top 10 unless people feel that they're unable to manage it for a number of reasons. It could be the fact that they cannot find cover through a quality insurer. It could be that they feel the cover is inadequate. Or it could be that they've had a loss experience that dictates that they cannot get cover for some aspect like natural catastrophe. This is skipping on for some reason. Okay, so some of the risks that we found increasing in prominence throughout the survey. Some surprises here. I mean, damage to reputation and brand has gone from number 4 in 2007 to number 1. That's interesting to us. It means people are more conscious about things like social media. They're conscious about the effect that an event might have on their brand worldwide, the effect it might have in country. You link that to things like increased competition, and you can see how a small item, a small event, can really start damaging your reputation and ultimately your brand value. You'll see it number 9, the big number 9, down from number 18, cyber risk, something that Murray will be talking on a little bit later. The biggest challenge within cyber risk, obviously, is understanding what that risk actually is to your business before you start to look to an insurance solution. Most of what we do as an organization is to assist you to understand the risk, not to go straight to a product. The product is the final step. It's around discovery. It's around having a conversation with all of our clients to better understand where the risk might be, how we address it through risk management structures, and maybe an insurance product. This is a powerful slide, I believe, in that it demonstrates to us the slight difference in the responses between the C-suite and the risk managers. Okay, and I don't know if you can see it clearly on the slide, you should be able to. The C-suite, the most important things really center around the revenue, which one would expect. On the risk management side, they are like us in insurance, prophets of doom. They want to come at you and say, well, these are the things that are going to go wrong. This is how it's going to affect our business. Okay, but what we see within this is an opportunity. It's really an opportunity for the C-suite to engage the risk managers more. It's about having that conversation more than once a year. Sorry, let me change that back. You really want to have the conversation with your risk manager more than once a year. It's not about when the policy falls due for renewal, suddenly you get on the internal phone line and you say to your risk manager, look, can we have a conversation? I don't know how we're going to manage the cost. No, it's about how we're going to talk about risk. And I would encourage all the C-suite members present to engage your risk manager more actively and on more than one occasion a year. Drilling down to just an Asia response, we found this very interesting, taking away from the global. When we generally speak to customers and say, what's important to you, the initial response is price. And the behavior around insurance is price. Is it cheap? Is it competitive? Actually, what the respondents have told us is that claim service and settlement is the number one thing. Price is always going to be important. If we're not competitive, we shouldn't be at the table. But claim service was number 1, coverage terms number 2, and financial stability of insurance companies number 3. That I find very interesting. I've spent 10 years, since 2004 in Asia. The very first event that I experienced in terms of claims in Asia was the tsunami in Thailand. Not great. Since then, in the time, 9 years I spent in Thailand, I went through floods, I went through 2 coups, burning of the inner Bangkok, I went through SARS in Hong Kong, all of these risks that have happened. And it showed me that the financial paying ability of an insurance company is absolutely critical. So the fact that Asia respondents recognize that is incredibly positive and a step in the right direction. The takeaways really from the survey are simple. It's that as our world expands and our business opportunities expand, so does the interconnectivity of risk. And the results of the survey show us that there is absolutely no doubt that the risks are connected, more so today than possibly they ever were before. For people that are talking about brand impact, you'll see that it covers across 53 risks that were rated within the survey. Interestingly, you'll find that out of those 53 risks, only 20% of those are insurable. 53 top risks, 20% insurable. That's quite frightening. 51% in total were uninsurable, completely uninsurable, unless, of course, you make use of things like captives. And a surprise to us really is that there isn't more use, effective use of captives within many of the businesses within Asia. In our experience, many of the businesses operating within the Asia region actually have pretty good risk management processes. They're just not called that. They're called standard operating procedures, and they work department by department but they're not collated into one cohesive manual that potentially the insurance market would recognize as such. So I said to the guys, look, you've got to give me a flag when I get to 8 minutes, only because Richard did remind me we wanted to have an opportunity for some questions and answers at the end. I've really flown through that so fast, it's frightening. And being an insurance and risk person, risk advisor that I am and that we are, we love to talk. And we love to engage you in conversations, because that's how we discover what's important to you and how you want to approach your business. The survey is available online. We will distribute that link to you. Feel free to go and download the full report and have a read. Myself and my colleagues are all available to have a conversation with you around that at any time, and after this forum, again, happy to talk to you. I'm going to pass over now to Dan. Dan's going to talk to you about important things like people. People did feature very highly in the risk management survey results on a number of different levels, and Dan's going to touch on one of those aspects that we believe is very important and certainly very relevant to businesses that operate in and from the Philippines, either out globally or with people coming into the country. So I'll hand over to Dan. Thank you.
Sensitive information, internal communications, communications with external stakeholders that was released into the public domain. They've had an enormous amount of employee information, salaries, terms and conditions, personal identification information, their tax numbers, their date of birth, their addresses, passport numbers, all of which facilitates identity theft, and all of which puts an enormous onus back on a company to protect that individual. And when you look at what's happened with Sony Pictures, they made a bad picture, a bad movie. They probably made more money out of that bad movie, but they've actually suffered a lot of litigation as a consequence. The litigation is coming by external parties, but also by their employees, and they're dealing with a reputational risk as well. So down on the bottom of this slide, you see the financial impact of a cyber event and what that really means in terms of how does a company come to quantify cyber risk, looking at the potential impacts. Social media, okay, as the Sony Pictures case study represents, social media is a vexed issue. We all in our businesses use social media for the purposes of communicating with our customers or our stakeholders relative to engaging the new generation. We need to use social media for the purposes of our company's objectives, expressing the value proposition, identifying the revenue opportunity. Social media also is a fairly significant threat from an employee behaviour perspective. And I know from at least our perspective, when we identify our employment status as being Aon, we are automatically bound by Aon's social media rules. And that's directly associated with the consequential risks associated with me behaving badly on social media, posting inappropriate content, but having a negative impact on the company's brand because I've identified myself in LinkedIn as Murray Wood, employed by Aon. Mobile applications for payments. Companies are looking at ways to expedite the whole payment process for services and/or products being delivered. The payment card industry, protocols around who is responsible for any form of funds transfer theft or any other information leakage is a very significant issue for businesses, particularly businesses in the retail sector. But everyone knows that mobile payment applications are fundamental and are only going to increase in their relevance to business. Cloud computing. When we do talk about cloud computing, we are really focusing here on a couple of key points. One, where is the data? Secondly, what are the laws of the country in where that data is being held? Often it's not in the country of the origination of that data. So if you're a Philippines company, you engage a Philippines cloud service provider. That cloud service provider may be in India. Where are the laws that are governing the custodialship of that data? And the other very important thing about vendor engagement is understanding your relationship with your IT vendors. Things around limitations of liability, indemnification principles. What happens when you have a data breach, or what happens when the IT vendor technology platforms fail for whatever reason? What does the IT vendor do in terms of a response? We've seen some very good examples where, unknown to the public, the relationship, the contractual relationships with the IT vendors is paramount. And a good example was a Singaporean bank. It had with its client, and that client demanding that they be front and centre during that intense media scrutiny. Now that bank suffered a huge operational risk capital charge in the order of $280 million. So there's another consequential risk associated with cloud computing. The insurance market is, to a large extent, being driven by the legislative environment. And when we look at the legislative environment, we see data privacy laws in countries exposing businesses to more and more risk. In the Philippines, in 2012, the government introduced a data privacy legislative regime, which we know, and hopefully all of you know, amongst other things, provides consumer redress for data breaches, and it also imposes upon a business notification requirements. And a notification requirement is quite simply a legal obligation on a company to inform those individuals that have had their data being compromised of that event. Now, there's many things that can happen after a data breach compromise, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later. In terms of trends in the insurance industry, the cyber insurance is a new product. We're in our generation, or the first iteration of the product offering. It's a new area of risk, and it's a new area of risk transfer. What we do know, though, that the businesses that are the first movers, the industry sectors that are the first movers in dealing with the risk, and then secondly, dealing with insurance, financial institutions, technology and telecommunications, healthcare, retail. They're all the businesses based on our global statistics and our data sets that we can identify that have gone through a risk identification and risk quantification process, understood what they're dealing with, and understood the value of insurance. Now, insurance, we look at many traditional insurance policies and try to assess how well or not do they respond to cyber risk exposures. And there's a misconception that existing insurance policies will respond to cyber risk exposures. Well, unfortunately, they do not. And unfortunately, the global insurance industry is taking a very particular stance on policy interpretation. Sony Corporation in Japan, as opposed to Sony Pictures, they had a general liability insurance policy when they were hacked into, when the Sony PlayStation hacking event happened about 5 years ago. During that event, Sony sought to cover some of their liability issues under the general liability policy. The insurer that was involved countersued Sony when Sony made a claim under their insurance policy. And they countersued so that they clearly determined that they had no responsibility to cover insurance risk under a policy that was not intended to cover a hacking event and consequential data compromise. That is just not an isolated incident. We have numerous examples in Asia, globally, where insurers are saying, we sell you cyber insurance. We have a solution for your cyber risk. We are not going to provide insurance coverage for cyber risk under traditional insurance policies. And this slide just gives you a very high-level overview of the coverage issues at a more technical level. The type of coverage that is available under a typical cyber insurance policy is broken up into first-party and third-party liability provisions. So any liability that a business is exposed to its employees, to its customers, to its stakeholders, to its vendors, you're effectively insured for that. Administrative procedures. This could be quite significant, actually. You know, these are the procedures that you may need to comply with in responding to a data breach. They can range from the engagement of PR firms to help manage the media issues that you're contending with, the communications with your stakeholders, the regulators, the police, customers, credit monitoring services are very important to take into account because they actually represent one of the more significant expense issues or increased cost of working that a company can deal with responding to a data compromise. The business interruption or loss of data, brand restoration. Dan talked about cyber risk already. Dan talked about extortion risk, but the insurance policies do cover extortion. Just jumping back to that very first point, the business interruption issue, increased cost of working, is, to our mind, one of the more significant aspects of the risk transfer solution. The issue around intellectual property or the loss of intellectual property is actually very misunderstood. Yesterday, Aon, in conjunction with the Ponemon Institute, released a report in New York, and there's going to be a global rollout of that report in the next few days, and there'll be some communications in the media across Asia. There was a release yesterday in the Wall Street Journal. The objective of the report that Ponemon Institute has released in conjunction with Aon is to identify the correlations that exist between insurability of physical risk, plant, property and equipment, as against intellectual property. And the really interesting part here is understanding that correlation relative to the financial impact on a company's financial earnings. So, you know, the profitability of the business, quarterly earning results, and so forth. And there's some very powerful messages. But the simple fact of the matter is companies understand insurance of physical assets. Companies do not understand insurability of intellectual property. And that's at a global level. At a regional level, whether that point is exasperated, I suspect so, but we'll be going into a deeper dive into that. From a risk mitigation perspective, there's a few things to take into account, but by and large, the most important point of all that we would like to emphasize for this audience in particular is that a business that has a top-down risk management approach is going to be the business that is best equipped to deal with a cyber event. Now, the unfortunate fact is, no matter how good your IT security systems are, no matter how good your risk mitigation systems are, no matter how under the radar you think you are flying from a cyber hacking event, the fact is you are exposed. The fact is that the hackers out there are better than your defenses. So it's not a matter of it won't happen, but it's a matter of when it may happen. If it does happen, then how well are you prepared to respond to a situation? And what are the policies, procedures, data incidents, response plans, disaster recovery plans that you have in place? So a company that has a top-down approach dealing with all of those issues, which is set by the board of directors, executed by the C-suite, implemented by the respective teams that are responsible for this, and here we talk about the responsible teams. And there's a whole bunch of internal stakeholders that need to be taken into account. Chief Privacy Officer, Chief Information Officer, Chief Security Officer, General Counsel, Head of HR, Head of Risk, so on and so forth. You want the legal team to be engaged. You want that legal team to be front and centre with all of the discussions that they're having with the IT vendors. Not only the IT vendors that might be responsible for a data breach, but the IT vendors that are responsible for the patches that may need to be introduced, or the forensic IT-ish guys that need to be brought in to understand what is the significance of the data breach, how long has the data breach been occurred, what information's been compromised, how significant is the compromise, has our IP been taken, has it been copied, and so forth. We are spending a lot of time dealing with two issues before we even start talking about the insurance aspect. We spend a lot of time dealing with cyber risk evaluation and cyber risk quantification. Now, the evaluation process is very important, and the issue there is, if we go back to my very first slide, we're trying to define cyber risk. Cyber risk has a unique meaning for many different industries. Some industries are more exposed because they hold a lot of personal customer information, customer data. Some industries are more exposed because they are reliant upon electronic trading platforms to conduct sales. Some people are more exposed because they have a significant amount of IP representing the value of their business. So there is no one standard for determining a cyber risk profile, and nor is there no one standard for identifying the quantification of that exposure, which is equally as challenging. So we are dealing with clients, the more sophisticated clients that want to have a more sophisticated discussion around risk, going through those issues with our risk evaluation experts and our actuaries that do the risk quantification work. We have a cyber diagnostic tool. It's an online just an online app. It's really simple, takes you about 20 minutes to complete, and you'll automatically receive a diagnostic giving your business a health check dealing with issues around your IT infrastructure and your hardware, the applications and the software that you use, data privacy governance standards, how you compare, and your sensitivity or vulnerability to cyber attacks, systems failure and data breaches. I will just quickly finish on this point. With a lot of C-suite executives here today, this is a really important issue to get across. Aon conducts a risk maturity index report on an annual basis. The report is undertaken in conjunction with the Wharton Business School in the US. And after several years now, there's a very significant amount of empirical data that's been established. And the great thing about this data that we've created is that it's drawn some positive correlations between those organisations that invest in risk and two financial metrics. One is stock price volatility and one is stock price earnings. Now, when having a discussion internally about the need to invest in risk, here is the perfect demonstration for the C-suite to say, well, let's invest in risk, because we know from the data set that Aon's pulled together globally that those organisations that do invest more in risk, that have a higher risk maturity scoring, have two outputs. Their stock price increases generally, and there's reduced stock price volatility. Now, from a C-suite perspective, it's very, very important, because the fact of the matter is most C-suite executives are remunerated by way of stock options and stock units. So there's a very compelling point to take away when thinking about risk. So on that point, I'm going to pass back to Richard to do the moderation.
Sure. Okay, so a hand for these guys. A very nice story. And interesting.